The stars looked different that morning when Captain Jake Morrison stepped onto the bridge of the human research vessel Meridian. Something felt wrong in the vast emptiness of space, though he could not put his finger on what it was. The ship floated near the edge of the Andromeda Gateway, a massive structure built by alien hands thousands of years before humans had even learned to make fire. Jake had been out here for 3 months now, studying the strange energy patterns that danced around the gateway. His crew of 45 men and women had grown used to the routine of deep space research. They would scan, they would record, they would send their findings back to Earth, and they would wait for new orders. It was quiet work, but important work. Commander Lisa Hayes looked up from her station where she had been monitoring the long-range sensors. Her face was pale and her hands shook slightly as she adjusted the controls. Lisa had been with the crew for 2 years, and Jake had never seen her look so troubled. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's coming from multiple sources across the galaxy. The signal is strong, stronger than anything we've ever recorded." Jake moved to her station and looked. At the readings, the numbers made no sense. The transmission was broadcasting on frequencies that should have been impossible to use across such vast distances. It was as if someone had found a way to make the entire galaxy into a single communication network. "Can you clean it up?" Jake asked. "I need to know what they're saying." Lisa worked at her console for several minutes, her fingers flying across the controls. Slowly, a voice began to emerge from the static. It was not human, that much was clear. The sounds were musical, almost like singing, but filled with a desperate sadness that made everyone on the bridge feel cold. "This is Thing Vexandra of the Zephyrian Collective," the voice said through the universal translator. "We send this message to all who can hear us. We are dying. Our worlds are falling to an enemy we cannot fight. We have tried everything, but nothing works. They consume the light itself, leaving only darkness behind." Jake felt his heart begin to race. The Zephyrian Collective was known throughout the galaxy as one of the most advanced civilizations ever to exist. They had technology that could manipulate time and space, weapons that could destroy entire star systems, and shields that could stop almost any attack. If they were calling for help, then something terrible was happening, the message continued, and Lisa worked to make the translation clearer. "The Void Bringers have awakened from their long sleep. They move through space like shadows, draining the energy from everything they touch. Our greatest weapons pass through them like light through air. Our strongest shields collapse at their approach. We have lost 3 worlds in the past week, and we fear we will lose many more." Dr. Amy Patterson, the ship's expert on alien life forms, joined them on the bridge. She had been studying the Zephyrians for years, and Jake could see the worry in her eyes as she listened to the message. "Captain," Amy said quietly, "the Zephyrians don't ask for help. Ever, in all the records we have of them, they have never once requested assistance from another species. They believe they are superior to all other life forms in the galaxy." The transmission grew stronger and more details became clear. The Zephyrians spoke of ancient legends, of a time when the galaxy was young and a great evil had nearly destroyed all life. They had thought it was just a story, a myth told to frighten children. But now the Void Bringers had returned, and they were more terrible than any legend could describe. "They consume stars," the voice continued. "They turn worlds into frozen wastelands. They leave nothing but empty space where once there was life. We have calculated their path, and they move toward the center of the galaxy. Earth lies directly in their way." Jake felt his blood turn to ice. Earth, humanity's home, was in danger from something that even the mighty Zephyrians could not stop. He thought of his wife Sarah and his 2 children back home, of the billions, of people who had no idea what was coming their way. The message gave more details about the enemy. The Void Bringers appeared to be made of pure darkness, creatures that existed partly in normal space and partly in some other dimension. They traveled in ships that looked like twisted versions of living things, vessels that pulsed with dark energy that hurt to look at directly. "We estimate they will reach the core systems in 6 months," the transmission concluded. To anyone who receives this message, we ask for your help. Share your knowledge, your weapons, your ideas. Together we may find a way to stop them. Alone, we will all die in the darkness they bring. The message ended, and the bridge fell silent. Jake looked around at his crew, seeing the same fear and uncertainty in their faces that he felt in his own heart. They were just a research vessel, far from home, with no weapons and no way to fight an enemy that could destroy entire star systems, but they were human, and humans did not give up easily. Jake straightened his shoulders and turned to his communications officer. Send a message to Earth Command. Tell them we have a code black situation. Tell them the galaxy is under attack, and we need every ship we can get. As the message raced toward Earth at faster-than-light speed, Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Meridian and stared out at the stars. Somewhere out there, an ancient evil was moving toward humanity's home, and they had 6 months to figure out how to stop it. The war for the galaxy was about to begin. 3 days had passed since the desperate message from the Zephyrian Collective reached Earth, and Captain Jake Morrison found himself leading a joint mission to see the enemy with his own eyes. The Meridian had been joined by 2 other human ships and a small fleet of alien vessels, all heading toward the recently fallen world of Kepler-442. The journey through hyperspace felt longer than usual, and Jake could sense the tension among his crew. Lieutenant Commander Kevin Nash, the ship's tactical officer, had been running combat simulations non-stop, trying to prepare for an enemy that seemed impossible to fight. His normally calm demeanor had cracked under the pressure of facing the unknown. "Captain, we're dropping out of hyperspace in 30 seconds, Kevin announced from his station. His voice carried a nervous edge that Jake had never heard before. All ships are reporting ready status. Jake nodded and activated the ship-wide communication system. All hands, this is the captain. We are about to see what we're up against. Stay alert, stay calm, and remember that we're here to gather information. Not to fight. Whatever we find down there, we need to learn from it." The stars shifted as the Meridian returned to normal space, and immediately Jake knew something was terribly wrong. The system should have been full of light from the young blue star at its center, but instead everything looked dim and gray. The star itself seemed smaller, weaker, as if something had drained away its power. Commander Lisa Hayes worked frantically at her sensor station, trying to get clear readings from the planet below. "Captain, the sensors are having trouble penetrating. Some kind of field around the planet. It's like trying to see through thick fog. I'm getting partial readings, but nothing makes sense." Dr. Amy Patterson joined them on the bridge, her face pale as she studied the data. "The energy readings are all wrong. According to these numbers, the planet should be frozen solid. The entire atmosphere should have collapsed by now." Jake made the decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "Prepare a landing party. We need to see what happened down there with our own eyes." The shuttle bay was filled with nervous energy as Marine Captain Beth Sullivan prepared her team for the mission. Beth had served in 3 different wars and had never backed down from a fight, but even she seemed unsettled by what they might find on the planet's surface. "Listen up," she told her Marines. "We don't know what we're walking into down there. Stay together, watch each other's backs, and if I give the order to run, you run. Don't try to be heroes." The shuttle descended through the planet's atmosphere, and what they saw through the windows made everyone fall silent. The once beautiful world of Kepler-442b had been transformed into a landscape of horror. Cities that had housed millions of Zephyrians now stood empty and dark, their crystalline buildings covered in a strange frost that seemed to absorb light instead of reflecting it. They landed in what had once been the planet's capital city, a place that should have been filled with the musical sounds of Zephyrian life. Instead, there was only silence, a silence so complete that it seemed to press against their ears like a physical weight. Captain Sullivan led the way through the empty streets, her weapon ready, even though she knew it probably would not help against the enemy they might face. The buildings around them were intact, but they felt wrong, as if the very matter they were made of had been changed somehow. "Over here," called out Sergeant Tom Bradley, one of Sullivan's most experienced Marines. He was standing beside what looked like a group of Zephyrians, but something was terribly wrong with them. They were perfectly still, their energy-based bodies frozen in crystalline form, their faces locked in expressions of terror and pain. Dr. Patterson ran her scanner over the frozen aliens, and the readings made her stomach turn. "They're not dead," she whispered. "They're trapped." Something drained all the energy from their bodies, but left their consciousness intact. They're aware, but they can't move, can't speak, can't do anything but experience this frozen hell. The landing party moved deeper into the city, finding the same scene repeated everywhere they looked. Millions of Zephyrians, all frozen in the moment of their greatest fear, all trapped in bodies that could no longer respond to their will. Then they saw it, moving through the shadows between the buildings like a living piece of darkness. The Voidbringer was smaller than Jake had expected, no larger than a human, but it moved in a way that hurt to watch. It seemed to exist in several dimensions at once, its form shifting and changing as it glided through the empty streets. Captain Sullivan raised her weapon and fired, but the energy blast passed right through the creature as if it were not there at all. The Voidbringer turned toward them, and Jake felt a cold that went deeper than his bones. It was not just the absence of heat, but the absence of life itself. "Everyone back to the shuttle," Jake ordered over the communication system. "Move now." But it was too late. The Voidbringer had noticed them, and it began to approach with a speed that defied understanding. The temperature around them dropped so quickly that their breath became visible, and the power readings on their equipment began to fall. Engineer Tony Garcia was the first to understand what was happening. "It's draining our power," he shouted. "Over the communication system. The batteries, the weapons, everything is losing energy." Jake felt the cold seeping into his bones as the creature came closer. His vision began to blur, and he realized that it was not just draining their equipment, but draining them as well. The Voidbringer was stealing the very life force from their bodies. Tony worked desperately with his tools, trying to create some kind of barrier between them and the creature. In his panic, he accidentally caused their shuttle's engines to create an unstable energy field. And suddenly the Voidbringer stopped. It seemed confused, as if it could no longer sense where they were. "Run," Jake gasped, feeling strength return to his limbs. "Everyone run now." They made it back to the shuttle just as the unstable field collapsed, and they lifted off into the gray sky of the dead world. Behind them, the Voidbringer watched them go, its form shifting and changing as it tried to understand what had just happened. Back aboard the Meridian, the crew worked to analyze what they had learned. The enemy was unlike anything they had ever encountered, a creature that existed partly outside normal space and time. But Tony's accidental discovery had given them hope. Human technology, different from the energy-based systems used by most alien races, might work in ways the Voidbringers did not expect. As Jake looked out at the dying star system, he knew that the real war was just beginning. The Voidbringers were coming, and humanity would need every advantage they could find to survive what was ahead. The news of humanity's encounter with the Voidbringers spread through Earth's military command like wildfire, and within 24 hours every major government on the planet was demanding answers. Admiral Danny Cooper stood in the war room, beneath the Pentagon, staring at a holographic display that showed the enemy's estimated path through the galaxy. President Susan Clark had authorized the activation of humanity's most secret project, something that had been hidden from the public for over 30 years. The Prometheus Protocol was born from humanity's darkest fears about what they might find in the depths of space, and now those fears were coming true. "Show me what we have," Admiral Cooper said to the team of scientists and engineers who had been working in secret laboratories around the world. Dr. Margaret Stone, the lead researcher on the project, stepped forward with a tablet full of classified information. "We've been preparing for this type of enemy since the first alien contact," she explained. "The Prometheus Protocol assumes that any truly dangerous species would have abilities beyond our current understanding of physics. So we develop weapons that work outside normal space." The centerpiece of the project was the newly constructed dreadnought Defiance, a ship that looked like no other vessel in the human fleet. Instead of the sleek lines of traditional spacecraft, it was covered in strange, geometric patterns that seemed to shift and change when viewed from different angles. Captain Jake Morrison found himself promoted to command of this experimental vessel, though he was not sure if the promotion was an honor or a death sentence. The ship's technology was so advanced that even the engineers who built it did not fully understand how it worked. Chief Engineer Maria Santos gave Jake a tour of the ship's most important systems, starting with the quantum tunnel drives that could punch holes through the fabric of space itself. The theory is that the Void Bringers exist partially in another dimension, she explained. If we can attack them from an angle they can't perceive, we might be able to hurt them. The ship's weapons were equally strange, designed to fire projectiles that existed in multiple dimensions at once. The ammunition was created using technology reverse-engineered from alien artifacts, combined with human engineering in ways that should have been impossible while the Defiance was being prepared for combat. Colonel Ryan Mitchell was training a new type of soldier. The Titan Corps consisted of Space Marines equipped with armor that used controlled nuclear reactions to generate massive amounts of power. The suits were dangerous to wear, but they could maintain their energy even when the Void Bringers tried to drain them. The enemy feeds on energy, Mitchell explained to his volunteers, so we're going to give them more energy than they can handle. These suits will keep running even if everything else around us shuts down. The first test of humanity's new weapons came sooner than expected. The frontier world of New Horizons sent out a distress call as Void Bringer ships appeared at the edge of their solar system. The alien defenders, including vessels from 6 different species, moved to intercept the enemy. Jake watched the battle from the bridge of the Defiance as the alien ships engaged the Void Bringers. The enemy appeared as massive shadows that seemed to bend light around them, supported by organic ships that pulsed with dark energy. The alien weapons, powerful energy beams that could destroy asteroids, passed harmlessly through the Void Bringers as if they were not there at all. One by one, the alien ships began to slow and stop as the Void Bringers drained their power. The crews inside were trapped, unable to move or fight back as the enemy consumed the energy from their vessels. It was a repeat of what had happened to the Zephyrians, but this time humanity was there to witness it. "All ships, this is Admiral Cooper," came the voice over the communication system. "Move into attack formation. Show these things what humans can do." The human fleet moved forward, led by the Defiance and followed by dozens of ships equipped with the new weapons. But as they approached the Void Bringers, something unexpected happened. The enemy's energy-draining field, so effective against alien technology, barely affected the human vessels. Captain Linda Foster, commanding the destroyer Retribution, was the first to realize what was happening. "They can't drain our power," she reported over the communication system. "Our weapons are still at full strength." The reason became clear as the battle continued. Human technology was based on different principles than alien systems. Where the aliens used pure energy weapons, humans still relied on kinetic projectiles. NUCLEA are explosives and chemical reactions. The Void Bringers could drain energy, but they could not stop a chunk of metal moving at high speed. Jake gave the order to fire, and the Defiance's main guns launched projectiles that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The shots struck the lead Void Bringer, and for the first time in thousands of years, one of the ancient enemies screamed in pain. The creature's form flickered and changed as it tried to phase out of normal space, but the multidimensional projectiles followed it through the dimensional barriers. Dark energy sprayed from the wound like blood, and the other Void Bringers turned their attention to the human fleet. "They're focusing on us now," reported Commander Lisa Hayes from her sensor station. "They recognize us as a threat?" The battle that followed was unlike anything in human history. The Void Bringers attacked with weapons that warped space and time, creating areas where gravity reversed and matter aged thousands of years in seconds. But the human ships, protected by their quantum tunnel drives, managed to stay just ahead. of the attacks. Colonel Mitchell's Titan Corps launched from the Defiance in their nuclear-powered armor, boarding the organic ships that supported the Voidbringers. The Marines found themselves fighting in corridors that seemed to exist in several dimensions at once, using weapons that fired bullets made of compressed matter. The enemy ships were not empty vessels but living things, their walls pulsing with dark energy that tried to drain the life from anyone who entered. But the Titan armor provided protection, and the Marines pressed forward, planting explosive charges in the ship's vital systems. Captain Foster discovered that the Voidbringers had a weakness during their phase transitions. For a brief moment, when they moved between dimensions, they became solid enough to be tracked by human sensors. She coordinated the fleet's attacks to target these transition points. And slowly, the enemy began to take damage. The battle lasted for 6 hours, and when it was over, 3 Voidbringers had been destroyed, and 2 more had been forced to retreat. The human fleet had lost nearly half its ships, but they had achieved something that no other species had managed in thousands of years. As Jake looked out at the wreckage floating in space, he realized that the real war was just beginning. The Voidbringers had been caught off guard by humanity's different approach to warfare, but they would adapt quickly. The next battle would be even harder, and humanity would need every advantage they could find to survive what was coming. The victory at New Horizons changed everything across the galaxy, and within days refugee ships from dozens of different species began arriving at human outposts. Word had spread that the impossible had happened, that someone had actually hurt the Voidbringers and lived to tell about it. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Defiance as yet another group of alien vessels approached Earth's outer defenses. These ships carried the survivors of the Andorian Empire, a proud warrior race that had never asked for help from anyone. Now their leader, General Crix Vorthan, was requesting permission to join the human fleet. Captain Morrison, the alien general said over the communication system, his voice heavy with defeat. My people have fought the Voidbringers for 3 weeks. We lost 800 ships and gained nothing. Our weapons cannot touch them, our shields cannot stop them, but you made them bleed. Dr. Amy Patterson had been studying the data from the battle, working with alien scientists who had brought their knowledge to Earth. What she discovered made her blood run cold. Jake, we need to talk privately, she said, leading him to a secure conference room. The Voidbringers aren't just some ancient enemy, Amy explained, showing him holographic displays of complex mathematical equations. They're the universe's way of preventing life from becoming too advanced. Every few thousand years, they wake up and reset galactic civilization back to a primitive state. The implications were staggering. Every great civilization that had ever existed, every technological marvel that had been lost to time, had been destroyed by the Voidbringers. They were not conquerors seeking territory or resources, but cosmic gardeners pruning life back whenever it grew too complex. How do you know this? Jake asked, though he was afraid to hear the answer. Because one of them told me, Amy replied. During the battle, I managed to establish communication with their leader. It calls itself the Prime Entropy, and it has been doing this job for millions of years. It's tired, Jake, so very tired. The communication had been brief but terrifying. The Prime Entropy had spoken directly into Amy's mind, its voice carrying the weight of eons of destruction. It had explained that the Voidbringers were not evil, but necessary. Life, if left unchecked, would eventually consume all energy in the universe and bring about its heat death. It offered us a choice, Amy continued. We can submit to the harvest like every other species, or we can be completely eliminated as a threat to universal order. Those are the only 2 options it has ever given. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. What did you tell it? Nothing yet. But I think it's waiting for an answer. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent message from Admiral Cooper. The Voidbringers had begun moving faster than expected, and their fleet was now only 3 months away from Earth. Worse, they had started adapting to human tactics, making their ships more resistant to kinetic weapons. President Clark called an emergency session of the Global Defense Council. bringing together military leaders from every nation on Earth. The meeting was held in the deepest bunker beneath the Pentagon, protected by layers of security that had never been breached. "We have a decision to make," the president announced to the assembled group. "We can try to negotiate with these creatures, or we can fight them with everything we have. But we cannot do both." Admiral Cooper stood and activated a holographic display showing the current positions of both fleets. "Negotiation is not an option. These things have been destroying civilizations for millions of years. They won't stop just because we ask nicely." But Dr. Patterson disagreed. "Maybe there's a third option. What if we don't fight them or submit to them? What if we try to free them from their cosmic duty?" The room fell silent as everyone considered the implications. The idea seemed impossible, but then again, so had hurting the Void Bringers in the first place. "Explain," President Clark said. "The Prime Entropy told me that they became what they are because they achieved transcendence and then were trapped in this role. They can't stop destroying civilizations because they believe it's the only way to save the universe. But what if they're wrong?" Jake found himself thinking about the battle at New Horizons, about how the Void Bringers had screamed when they were hurt. It had not sounded like the cry of a monster, but the cry of something in pain. "We need more information," he said finally. "We need to understand what these creatures really are before we decide how to deal with them." Admiral Cooper authorized a reconnaissance mission deep into Voidbringer territory. The target was their staging ground, a region of space where several star systems had been completely drained of energy. It was the most dangerous mission ever attempted by human forces. Jake volunteered to lead the mission, taking the Defiance and a small fleet of the most advanced ships in the human arsenal. The journey would take them through space where the laws of physics had been twisted by the Voidbringer's presence, where reality itself became unstable. Chief Engineer Maria Santos worked around the clock to prepare the ships for the mission. She installed additional quantum stabilizers to keep the vessels from being torn apart by dimensional rifts, and she upgraded their weapons with new ammunition designed to work in unstable space. Colonel Mitchell selected his best Marines for the mission, knowing that many of them might not return. The Titan Corps had been expanded to include volunteers from every branch of the military, men and women who were willing to risk everything to protect humanity. As the small fleet prepared to depart, Jake received a final message from President Clark. "The entire human race is counting on you, Captain. Bring back the information we need to save our world." The ships entered hyperspace and began their journey toward the heart of Voidbringer territory. Behind them, Earth's defenses were being strengthened with every weapon humanity could build. Orbital platforms armed with railguns, underground bunkers filled with nuclear missiles, and fleets of automated ships designed to fight without human crews. But Jake knew that all of these preparations might be useless if they could not understand their enemy. The Voidbringers were not just powerful, they were ancient beyond human comprehension. They had seen the birth and death of countless civilizations, and they had the wisdom that came from eons of experience. As the Defiance traveled through the twisted space near the staging ground, Jake began to understand what they were really up against. This was not just a war between species, but a battle for the very nature of existence itself. The Voidbringers represented order and control, while humanity represented chaos and growth. The question that haunted him was whether these two forces could ever coexist, or if one would have to destroy the other for the universe to survive. In 3 days, he would have his answer. The space around the Voidbringer staging ground was unlike anything Captain Jake Morrison had ever seen, and he had traveled to the strangest corners of the galaxy during his 20 years of service. Stars flickered in and out of existence like dying candles, while planets hung motionless in their orbits, drained of all energy and warmth. The Defiance moved slowly through this graveyard of worlds, its quantum stabilizers working overtime to keep the ship from being torn apart by the dimensional rifts that split space like scars. Commander Lisa Hayes monitored the sensors, but the readings made no sense. According to her instruments, they were somehow existing in 7 different dimensions at the same time. "Captain, we're detecting massive energy signatures ahead," she reported, her voice tense with concentration. But they're not like anything in our databases? It's as if the energy is moving backward through time. Dr. Amy Patterson studied the readings from her station, trying to understand what they were seeing. The Void Bringers aren't just draining energy from this space. They're unraveling the fundamental forces that hold reality together. This entire region exists in a state between order and chaos. The small human fleet pressed deeper into the corrupted space, following energy trails that led toward what appeared to be a massive structure floating in the void. As they got closer, Jake realized it was not a building or a ship, but something far more disturbing. "My God," whispered Chief Engineer Maria Santos. "That's not a structure. It's a collection of worlds." The thing before them was composed of dozens of planets that had been somehow fused together into a single massive entity. Each world was perfectly preserved but completely lifeless, their surfaces covered in the same strange frost they had seen on Kepler 442b. Billions of beings from hundreds of different species were frozen on these worlds, all trapped in the moment. Of their greatest fear, Colonel Ryan Mitchell prepared his Titan cores for what might be their most dangerous mission yet. "We're going aboard that thing," he told his Marines. "I know it looks impossible, but we need to understand what the Void Bringers are really doing with all these dead civilizations." The boarding party launched from the Defiance in specially modified shuttles designed to navigate through unstable space. As they approached the fused worlds, they could see that the surface was covered in structures that pulsed with dark energy, like veins carrying poison through a dying body. They landed on what had once been the capital world of the hegemony of stars, a civilization that had fallen to the Voidbringers 3,000 years earlier. The buildings were intact, but they felt wrong, as if the very atoms they were made of had been changed in some fundamental way. "Stay together," Mitchell ordered his team as they moved through the empty streets. "Don't touch anything unless you have to, and keep your suits sealed. We don't know what kind of atmosphere this place has anymore." They found the first group of preserved beings in what had been a market square. Thousands of aliens from dozens of different species stood frozen in place, their faces locked in expressions of terror and confusion. But as Dr. Patterson scanned them with her instruments, she made a discovery that changed everything. "They're not dead," she whispered over the communication system. "Their consciousness is still active. They're aware of everything that's happening around them, but they can't move or speak or do anything except experience this eternal nightmare." The implications were staggering. The Voidbringers were not just destroying civilizations, they were preserving them in a state of perpetual suffering. Every being that had ever fallen to them was still alive, trapped in a prison of their own frozen body. But the most shocking discovery came when they reached the center of the fused worlds. There, in a massive chamber that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once, they found the truth about the Voidbringers themselves. The prime entropy was not a single being, but a collective consciousness made up of the first species to ever achieve transcendence. Millions of years ago, they had evolved beyond physical form and gained the power to manipulate the fundamental forces of the universe. But with that power had come a terrible responsibility. We became guardians against the heat death of existence. The prime entropy spoke directly into their minds, its voice carrying the weight of eons of sorrow. "Life, if allowed to grow unchecked, will consume all energy and bring about the end of everything. We prevent this by resetting civilization whenever it becomes too advanced." Jake felt the ancient being's pain as if it were his own. The Voidbringers had been performing their cosmic duty for so long that they had forgotten what it was like to live without the burden of universal responsibility. They had become prisoners of their own transcendence, unable to break free from the role they had accepted. "But you preserve the consciousness of those you harvest," Amy said, her voice filled with horror. "You keep them alive to suffer forever. We preserve them so that their knowledge and experience are not lost," the prime entropy replied. "Each civilization teaches us new ways to maintain the balance, but yes, they suffer, and so do we." are all trapped in this cycle of necessary destruction. The conversation was interrupted by urgent warnings from the Defiance. More Voidbringer ships were approaching the staging ground, and they had detected the human presence. The boarding party had minutes to escape before they would be overwhelmed, but as they prepared to leave, Jake made a decision that would change the course of the war. Instead of running, he opened a direct communication channel to the Prime Entropy, and said the words that no species had ever spoken to the ancient guardians. What if there was another way? What if you didn't have to carry this burden alone? The Prime Entropy paused, its massive consciousness focusing on the small human captain. No other species has ever offered to share this responsibility. They only beg for their lives or rage against their fate. We're not like other species, Jake replied. We don't accept that problems can't be solved. We don't believe in impossible situations. Maybe it's time to try something different. For the first time in millions of years, the Prime Entropy felt something it had thought was lost forever. It felt hope. The ancient being began to consider possibilities it had never imagined, ways to break free from the cycle of destruction that had defined its existence for so long. As the human fleet raced away from the staging ground, pursued by Voidbringer ships that moved like living shadows through the corrupted space, Jake knew that everything had changed. The war was no longer about survival, but about redemption. They were not just fighting for humanity's future, but for the souls of the ancient guardians who had lost their way in the darkness of cosmic responsibility. The final battle would not be won with weapons, but with hope, and humanity was about to teach the galaxy what that word truly meant. The final confrontation did not take place in normal space, but in the dimensional realm where the Voidbringers truly existed. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Defiance as the ship prepared to make a jump that no human vessel had ever attempted before. A journey into the space between spaces where thought and reality merged into one. Chief Engineer Maria Santos had worked for 3 days straight to modify the ship's quantum drives, creating a system that could punch through the barriers between dimensions. The process was dangerous beyond measure, and there was no guarantee that the ship or its crew would survive the transition. All stations report ready, Captain, Commander Lisa Hayes announced, though her voice carried a tremor that spoke of the fear they all felt. The dimensional rift is stable, but only for the next 10 minutes. Jake activated the ship-wide communication system and spoke to his crew one final time. Everyone knows what we're here to do. We're not going to fight the Voidbringers. We're going to try to save them. If we succeed, we save the galaxy. If we fail, at least we tried something that no one else has ever attempted. The Defiance entered the dimensional rift, and immediately everything changed. The ship seemed to stretch and compress at the same time, while colors that had no names flowed past the windows like liquid light. Jake felt his consciousness expand beyond his physical body, touching the minds of his crew and sensing their thoughts and fears. They emerged into a realm where the normal laws of physics held no meaning. Here, the Voidbringers existed in their true form, not as the shadow creatures they appeared to be in normal space, but as beings of pure consciousness struggling under the weight of cosmic responsibility. Dr. Amy Patterson felt the presence of the Prime Entropy filling her mind, its ancient consciousness touching hers with a gentleness that seemed impossible from such a powerful being. You have come to the place where we truly live, it said without words. Here, there can be no deception, no lies, only truth. The truth that surrounded them was overwhelming. Jake could see the entire history of the galaxy, the rise and fall of countless civilizations, the endless cycle of growth and destruction that the Voidbringers had maintained for millions of years. He saw species that had achieved wonders beyond imagination, only to be cut down when they grew too powerful, but he also saw the pain of the Voidbringers themselves, ancient beings who had sacrificed their own happiness and freedom to protect the universe from destruction. They had become prisoners of their own sense of duty, trapped in a role that they could not abandon even though it brought them nothing but sorrow. We have tried to find another way, the Prime Entropy explained, its thoughts flowing like a river of sadness through Jake's mind. For millions of years, we have searched for an alternative to the cycle of destruction. But every species we have encountered follows the same pattern of growth, expansion, and eventual threat to universal stability. President Susan Clark's voice reached them through the quantum communication system, her words carrying across the dimensional barriers. Then maybe it's time to try working with a species instead of against them. Humanity offers to share this burden with you. The offer hung in the dimensional space like a bright star in an ocean of darkness. Never before had any species volunteered to help the Voidbringers maintain cosmic balance. Always they had begged for mercy or raged against their fate. But none had ever offered to become partners in the ancient duty. Jake felt the collective consciousness of the Voidbringers turn its attention to humanity, examining their species, with an intensity that made his soul feel naked and exposed. They saw the wars humans had fought, the mistakes they had made, the cruelty they were capable of showing to each other and to other species, but they also saw something else, something that no other species had ever possessed in quite the same way. They saw humanity's refusal to accept that any problem was truly unsolvable, their willingness to sacrifice themselves for others, and their strange ability to find hope in even the darkest situations. You would take on this burden willingly? The Prime Entropy asked, its voice filled with wonder. You would become guardians of cosmic balance, knowing that it would mean making decisions that cause suffering to countless beings? Not alone, Jake replied, his thoughts reaching out to touch the consciousness of the ancient being. We would do it together. Humans and Voidbringers working as partners to find a better way. Maybe the problem isn't that civilizations become too advanced. Maybe the problem is that they're not advanced enough to handle the responsibility that comes with power. The idea spread through the collective consciousness like ripples on a pond. For the first time in eons, the Voidbringers began to consider the possibility that their method was not the only solution to the cosmic problem they faced. Dr. Patterson added her voice to the conversation, her scientific mind working to find practical solutions. Instead of destroying advanced civilizations, we could guide them. We could teach them how to use their power responsibly, how to grow without consuming everything around them. The Prime Entropy's form began to change, shifting from the shadow creature it had become back toward something that resembled the being it had been before transcendence. The risk is enormous. If we are wrong, if these civilizations cannot be trusted with unlimited power, the universe itself could be destroyed. Then we'll watch them carefully, Jake said. We'll work with them, learn from them, and if necessary, we'll stop them. But we'll try teaching first instead of destroying. The decision that followed was made not by words but by a merging of consciousness. The Voidbringers and humanity joined their minds together, creating something new, a partnership between ancient wisdom and young hope. The pain that had driven the Voidbringers for millions of years began to ease as they finally found companions who could share their burden. Admiral Danny Cooper watched from Earth as the dimensional rift closed and the Defiance returned to normal space. But the ship that emerged was not the same vessel that had entered the rift. It now carried within it a new form of consciousness, a blend of human determination and ancient wisdom that would guide the galaxy toward a better future. The war was over, not because one side had destroyed the other, but because enemies had become allies. The Voidbringers, now calling themselves the Guardians of Light, began the long process of releasing the consciousness they had preserved for so long, while humanity took on the role of teachers and guides for the younger species of the galaxy. 10 years later, Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of the starship Unity, watching as children from a dozen different species played together on the first world to be jointly governed by material and transcendent beings. The galaxy had entered a new age, one where growth and responsibility walked hand in hand. We didn't win because we were stronger, Dr. Patterson said as she joined him at the window. We won because we refused to accept that winning meant anyone had to lose. Below them, the children laughed and played, unaware that they were living proof that even the most ancient and impossible problems could be solved when beings chose cooperation over conflict. The galaxy had cried for help, and humanity had answered not with fury but with hope.